So what we learn to do growing up is to prune our greatness, to restrict our nature in order to secure the relationship that we need for survival. And one of the most important things that we can do as grown-ups is to learn to become our own containers by providing new energetic frames, because living your purpose requires you to show up in your greatness. And your greatness is not that crazy big thing outside of you, it simply is your nature. Underneath the conditioning, the core of who you are, without the pruning. There is no greatness outside of yourself. It's simply when you learn to strip away the conditions that you rediscover your nature, your greatness, right inside of your core, where it's always been patiently waiting for you to step out of your own way. So today I want to talk about why you are not living your purpose. It's so unpopular and nobody wants to look at it. Most people don't, at least. And that is the topic of shame. Let me explain, give me a moment. So here's some context. Personal example. A few days ago, I found myself in a group coaching call and we went into breakout rooms to talk about our end results in small groups of 3 people. The end result is the state of reality around you and of individual personal identity that you need to embody in order to bring that outer reality about. That represents the end result, that represents the goal, the desire already achieved. Imagine you had the thing you say you want to create. What would your life look like from inside that state, from inside that desire fulfilled, that goal achieved? And in that small breakout room, we were supposed to talk about our end results. That was the task. Here's what we ended up doing. It was like there was a silent agreement. Every single one of us ended up talking about the reasons why they struggled to imagine their end result. And now you might be thinking, I totally agree, I struggle to imagine my end result, but what does that have to do with the topic of shame? I can only speak for myself and about my sensations and my embodied experience in that moment. And I noticed that I felt uneasy, that I felt even slightly ashamed of talking about my end result, my Delulu end goal vision state in this group. I felt exposed at the thought of sharing my end result so vulnerably. So what I chose to do in order to avoid the uncomfortable feeling of feeling ashamed of the big Delulu vision was to play small, stay silent, and in that situation, repeating the pattern that is a reason why the end result is not right here in my life in this very moment. I've talked about this in my past few videos over and over again, how we are creating and recreating our own limitations. Because from a metaphysical standpoint, you are creating your own reality, and so you are the only common denominator between what you want to create and what is presenting in your reality. Because what is presenting in your reality is what you have brought into creation. For many of us, also talked about that before, that means creating from the default state, from the default mode, creating from a level of unconsciousness. Repeating the thoughts we thought last year and 10 years ago and 30 years ago. Repeating unconsciously the belief systems, the behavioral patterns and coping mechanisms that upheld our dysfunctional level of normal last year and 5 years ago and 20 years ago. Recreating the limitations that we then see arise in front of our eyes, calling it other people's responsibility, calling it bad luck, calling it fate. So in that group call, all 3 of us talked about our end result in the way that felt safe, which equaled its absence. What felt safe was the absence of the end result. To a degree that we weren't even comfortable being seen, being witnessed, talking about that end result. That is no base for an energetic container, talked about the energetic container before, that can hold the end result manifested in the 3D. not going to happen from that container. Is this pessimistic? Is this fatalistic? Is this negative? No, actually not. I noticed. What a beautiful thing to notice. Because remember, step 0 is always the level of unawareness. Step 0 is disidentification with the very thing that is standing between us and what we are trying to achieve. Identifying that vague, subtle, felt sense of, all right, rather not go there. I'm going to take the other route, the route that's more familiar, the route that is leading me straight into the absence of the end result. Noticing that is the first step. So any moment in which you recognize the way you have been contributing to the outer limitations you perceive on the outside that you think do not have anything to do with your desires, with what you want, while deep down you are projecting those outer limitations in order to keep yourself safe in what's familiar. And the moment you notice that is the moment you are freeing yourself. Like the only thing standing in your way ultimately is cognitive dissonance, is the split between the truth you are feeling inside and the perception you are having and the thoughts you are having. I want to take that next step and create what I want while your system is feeling more and more disease and tenseness and dysregulation and stress. That is dissonance. And you want to close that gap. Learn to hold your own truth in order to act in a way that is actually beneficial, that is actually in alignment with that path of least resistance, which is the path of the end result, because this is not about space and time. And that is such an important observation, to see where you are keeping yourself from your own purpose, because being seen taking the actual steps to get there would make you feel uneasy or possibly even ashamed. And in this context, I want to talk about what shame actually is, where shame actually comes from. Shame is an internalized compliance with externally perceived dissonance from other people. Usually we made these experiences in childhood, certain situations where we were given the feeling that the way we are, that our nature is not appropriate, is not good enough, does not belong in a group context, in an interaction, into a relationship, into any sort of connection. However, if you are still stuck within that relational context, either because it's your parents or other caregivers, or because it's in a school context and you literally have to go to school. So there's no way getting away from these relational containers. As a result, what is going to happen is that you will internalize the external dissonance and unconsciously declare that indeed, I'm not good enough. Indeed, who am I to say I could do or achieve this thing? Who am I to not play small, so I better play small? In order to keep the relational context that we depend upon, that we are stuck in, or were stuck in, what happens is that the way of self-limitation that result from these experiences become part of our default state, become part of what is called a personality, our identity configuration, just the way we are, just the person we are, just the individualized setup of what we can achieve and what of course we can't achieve, and what of course we've never been good at, the things we rather stay quiet about. Where are you keeping yourself from the experiences that you want to be creating because of old, ancient, outdated shame configurations in your system that you have disassociated from your experience now, today, rather than holding and embodying them by becoming aware of the pattern that you are creating and recreating? And as we grow up, we keep creating these representations and these projections of our earlier relational containers we experienced. And in that manner, we keep reproducing and reproducing and reproducing similar relationships as grown-ups. And we keep limiting ourselves in the same way to anticipate the other's disapproval to maintain the safety before the disapproval could even be mentioned. So what we start doing as grown-ups is we go first. We be the first to make sure that the situations in which we were shamed, meaning in which we were disapproved of in our nature, in who we are, cannot repeat. So what we learn is we learn to anticipate other people's disapproval within similar relational contexts in order to not actually experience the same disapproval again. So we back off. We make sure to play small before we can be disapproved of. Before anyone could say, that's never gonna happen, that's ridiculous. Your desire, your dream, your goal, that's ridiculous. Look at you. If you play small before, then that's not gonna happen. But that is a coping strategy of avoidance. And as long as you keep being focused on the outer limitations, you are going to miss the reality of the avoidance that you yourself are displaying in order to maintain the safety. Integrating shame as a grown-up is one of the most important things we can learn to do in order to close the gap between the nature we feel to be true inside of us and the output we would like to be creating. So if chronic stuckness, chronic procrastination, I've been there, is an issue for you, then I want to invite you to look into the shame theme in your life. Look at that more closely. And always remember that the first thing that's going to happen is that you will be confronted with step 0, with the disidentification. The first thing is saying, oh no, that's not about me. Just notice where your mind is going instead. Are you imagining your end result? Can you talk about where you're going, what you want to be creating in life without having that making you feel uneasy? That is where the change happens. That is where you start living your purpose. That is where you start alchemizing that shame that might be present somewhere deep within you into confidence, into knowing that you have everything it takes to bring that desire to life. Because that's why you have it. And you wouldn't have the desire if you weren't meant to achieve it, to go after it. You wouldn't see the path, and the path wouldn't feel so incredibly good to your heart and soul if that wasn't meant to be your path. Most of you don't really think you're too small or too incompetent to go after your desires. You are unconsciously anticipating the threat of being abandoned by social groups that your nervous system, your entire system used to depend upon for survival. But if you are still caught in that loop, then you are manifesting from a flawed, outdated premise, from the default state, from belief systems that do not serve you anymore, and that you simply need to become aware of in the moment of carrying out the actions in sync with that belief system in order to shift the outcome, in order to shift the container, in order to shift your state. There's this beautiful quote by Marianne Williamson, which is, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It was when I started to understand the dynamics of shame, when I started to understand what this quote actually means. I've known it for years and years and years, and I thought, no, that sounds so nice. But I didn't really feel it. For many years, my impulse was to say, well, actually, my deepest fear is being inadequate. No. Your deepest fear is losing the connection, the relationship, the relational containers to grow beyond the container that can hold us. Our deepest fear is to lose connection by shining so brightly that we are abandoned by the group because we don't fit in anymore. There are different rules to individual groups and family systems. There are ways in which bigness and boldness and greatness is honored and approved of. And there are other ways in every system, in every larger group setting, where certain forms of greatness fall into the shadow of that group and therefore cannot be contained by that group and therefore will be rejected by that group, by that system. So what we learn to do growing up is to prune our greatness, to restrict our nature in order to secure the community, the relationship, in order to stabilize our own existence and validation within that system that we need for survival. And one of the most important things that we can do as grown-ups is to learn to become our own containers. Expand the containers we grew up in by providing new energetic frames, a new energetic baseline. Because living your purpose requires you to show up in your greatness. And your greatness is not that crazy big thing outside of you. It simply is your nature. Underneath the conditioning, the core of who you are without the pruning, your essence without the limitations attached to it. There is no greatness outside of yourself. It's simply when you learn to strip away the conditions, to strip away that level 0 of disidentification, that you rediscover your nature, your greatness right inside of your core, where it's always been patiently waiting for you to step out of your own way. I'm so eager to have my next group coaching call and breakout room and to be asked the same or similar question and to alchemize the embodied experience I'm having talking about my end result in a way that I was not able to talk about it before. Now I have identified it. And now I'm ready for the next level of growth in that area because that is the logical result. I've just expanded my container. And I'm so looking forward to hearing from you where you are now learning to expand your container because of the awareness, new level of awareness you are now bringing to your former limitations, to the former areas where you used to keep yourself small and limited and not showing up in your greatness. Let me know whatever comes to mind. Let me know what comes up for you as you hear this message, which again turned out to be totally surprising to me because I don't have a script. Thank you for your flexibility with all of the changes that this channel is currently going through. Also, if you're new to the channel, then welcome and thank you so much for being here, for being a part of the occasionally awake energetic container that we all are. So I hope I see you in my next video, and for now, have a beautiful day. Bye.